Sarah Martinez walked into the administrative office at Nellis Air Force Base with the same nervous energy she carried to every new assignment. Her hands gripped the manila folder containing her transfer orders, but hidden beneath those official papers lay a secret she had guarded for 12 years. Nobody at this base knew that before she became a quiet logistics officer, she had been one of the most skilled fighter pilots the military had ever trained. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Nevada desert as Sarah made her way through the familiar routine of checking in at a new duty station. She wore the uniform of a captain in the Air Force, her ribbons and badges telling the story of a competent but unremarkable career in supply chain management. What they didn't tell was the story of Lieutenant Sarah Viper Martinez, a pilot who had once flown combat missions over hostile territory with precision that amazed even her instructors. Colonel James Harrison looked up from his desk as Sarah entered his office. He was a stern man in his 50s, with gray hair and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything with military efficiency. Sarah stood at attention and presented her orders, maintaining the composed demeanor she had perfected over the years of hiding her true background. "Captain Martinez," Colonel Harrison said, reviewing her file. "I see you're coming to us from logistics at Andrews. Good timing, too. We need someone with your experience to help coordinate some upcoming training exercises." He paused, studying her record more closely. "Says here you've been in supply and logistics for your entire career. No flight experience listed." Sarah's heart skipped slightly, but her expression remained neutral. "That's correct, sir. I've focused entirely on logistics operations." What Colonel Harrison couldn't see in that file was the real story. 12 years earlier, Sarah had been among the top 5% of pilots in her flight training class. She had excelled in every aspect of flying, from basic maneuvers to advanced combat tactics. Her instructors had marked her as a future leader, someone destined for the most elite fighter squadrons in the Air Force. But life had other plans. During her final training exercises, Sarah had received devastating news from home. Her younger brother Miguel, who was only 16, had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. Her parents, who had immigrated from Mexico and worked multiple jobs to support their family, were overwhelmed by the medical expenses and emotional strain. Miguel looked up to Sarah more than anyone else in the world, and she knew he needed her support during the most difficult time of his life. Making the hardest decision of her military career, Sarah had voluntarily transferred out of the pilot program. She told her commanding officers that she wanted to pursue opportunities in logistics, claiming it offered better long-term career prospects. Nobody questioned her decision, though many were surprised that such a talented pilot would choose to give up flying. Sarah spent the next several years working in various logistics roles while using every available leave day and weekend to be with Miguel during his treatment. She learned about supply chains and inventory management, becoming genuinely skilled at her new profession, but her heart remained in the cockpit. She watched from the ground as other pilots flew the aircraft she had once mastered, keeping her piloting skills sharp through flight simulators and civilian flying lessons she took in secret. Miguel's treatment was successful, and he eventually recovered completely. He went on to college, got married, and started his own family, never knowing the sacrifice his sister had made for him. Sarah had never told him or anyone else about giving up her pilot career. She simply said she had found her calling in logistics, and everyone accepted that explanation. Now, 12 years later, Sarah had become an expert at living two lives. During the day, she was Captain Martinez, the efficient logistics officer who could coordinate complex supply operations and manage inventory systems with impressive skill. But in the evenings and weekends, she remained connected to her true passion. She maintained a private pilot's license and frequently flew civilian aircraft, keeping her skills current and sharp. She studied every advancement in military aviation, reading technical manuals and staying up to date on new aircraft systems and combat tactics. Colonel Harrison assigned Sarah to work with Major Kevin Thompson, the base operations officer who coordinated training schedules for the various squadrons stationed at Nellis. Thompson was a friendly man in his early 40s who had flown transport aircraft before moving into administrative roles. He welcomed Sarah warmly and began explaining her responsibilities. "You'll be working closely with our fighter squadrons," Thompson explained as they walked through the base operations center. "We've got F-16s, F-35s, and a small number of F-22 Raptors here for advanced training. Your job will be coordinating the logistics support for their training missions." Sarah's pulse quickened at the mention of the F-22. The Raptor was the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, a stealth fighter with capabilities that exceeded anything else in the sky. She had dreamed of flying one during her original pilot training, but the program was so exclusive that only the very best pilots ever got the chance. As Thompson showed her around the flight line, Sarah got her first close look at the aircraft she would be supporting. The F-16 Fighting Falcons sat in neat rows, their sleek forms familiar from her training days. The F-35 Lightning II aircraft represented the newest generation of multi-role fighters packed with advanced technology. But it was the F-22 Raptors that truly captured her attention. Only 4 of the stealth fighters were stationed at Nellis, and they looked like something from the future. Their angular, faceted surfaces were designed to deflect radar waves, making them nearly invisible to enemy detection systems. Sarah knew that each aircraft cost over $150 million and represented the pinnacle of American aerospace technology. "Beautiful machines," Thompson said, noticing her interest in the F-22s. "Too bad they're so expensive to operate. We only get to see them in action during special training exercises." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Standing so close to the aircraft she had once dreamed of flying brought back a flood of memories and emotions she had spent years learning to suppress. Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into her new duties with characteristic dedication. She quickly learned the specific requirements of each squadron and began streamlining their logistics operations. Her efficiency and attention to detail impressed everyone she worked with, and she soon became known as someone who could solve problems that stumped other logistics officers. But the more time Sarah spent around the flight line, the more difficult it became to suppress her true nature. She found herself studying aircraft performance data not just for logistics purposes, but because she couldn't help analyzing flight characteristics and tactical capabilities. When pilots discussed mission parameters and aircraft limitations, she had to bite her tongue to avoid offering insights that would reveal her deep understanding of flight operations. The breaking point came during a routine training exercise involving the F-35 squadron. Sarah was in the operations center coordinating fuel and maintenance support when she overheard a conversation between 2 young pilots who were planning a complex training mission. "I'm telling you, the approach angle is all wrong," one pilot was saying to another. "If we come in at that vector, we'll be exposed to simulated surface-to-air missiles for at least 30 seconds. "The mission plan calls for that approach," his wingman replied. "Besides, the F-35's stealth capabilities should protect us." Sarah knew immediately that both pilots were wrong. The mission plan had been designed by someone who didn't fully understand the F-35's radar cross-section characteristics at different angles. The approach they were planning would indeed expose them to unnecessary risk, but not for the reasons the first pilot thought. There was a much better approach vector that would minimize their exposure while still accomplishing the mission objectives. She started to step forward to offer her input, then stopped herself. A logistics officer shouldn't know enough about flight tactics to critique mission planning. But as she watched the 2 pilots continue their debate, both moving further away from an optimal solution, her professional instincts warred with her need for secrecy. Major Thompson appeared beside her, also listening to the pilots' discussion. He shook his head with mild frustration. "Sometimes I wish we had more experienced tactical advisors available for these training missions," he muttered. "These young pilots are skilled, but they don't always see the bigger picture." Sarah made a decision that would change everything. "Sir, if I may make a suggestion based on the logistics data I've been reviewing." Thompson looked at her with interest. "Go ahead, Captain." "The fuel consumption data shows that aircraft performing this type of mission use significantly less fuel when they approach from the northeast rather than the southwest," Sarah said carefully, threading the needle between helpful advice and revealing too much knowledge. "It might be worth having them consider that vector." Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's an interesting observation. The northeast approach would also provide better terrain masking." He paused, studying Sarah more closely. "Have you given much thought to tactical considerations before?" "I find that understanding the operational requirements helps me do my logistics job better," Sarah replied, which was technically true if not complete. Thompson nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. Let me talk to those pilots." As Thompson walked over to discuss the approach options with the young pilots, Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. She had helped improve the mission plan, but she had also taken a step closer to revealing capabilities she had kept hidden for 12 years. The pilots accepted Thompson's suggestion about the northeast approach, and the mission proceeded without incident. But Sarah noticed that Thompson began paying more attention to her insights during subsequent planning sessions. He started asking her opinion on various operational matters, always framing them in terms of logistics implications. Sarah found herself walking a tightrope, trying to be helpful without revealing the depth of her tactical knowledge. She made suggestions about aircraft positioning based on maintenance efficiency and recommended timing changes based on fuel delivery schedules, when in reality her recommendations were based on sound tactical principles she had learned during her pilot training. The situation became more complex when Colonel Harrison announced that Nellis would be hosting a major training exercise called Operation Desert Thunder. The exercise would bring together squadrons from multiple bases to practice advanced air combat tactics. Sarah's logistics responsibilities would expand significantly, requiring her to coordinate support for nearly twice as many aircraft as usual. "This is our chance to show what we can do," Thompson told Sarah as they reviewed the exercise plans. "Higher headquarters will be watching this operation closely. If we execute it flawlessly, it could mean good things for everyone involved." Sarah studied the exercise parameters and immediately saw several potential problems. The planners had scheduled too many operations too close together, creating bottlenecks that would delay missions and waste fuel. The maintenance schedules didn't account for the increased stress on aircraft systems during intensive training. Most importantly, some of the planned air-to-air engagements were using outdated tactics that wouldn't prepare pilots for modern threats. She started to draft a memo outlining her concerns, then stopped. How could a logistics officer critique air combat tactics without raising suspicions? But as she thought about the young pilots who would participate in these exercises, she knew she couldn't stay silent if there were safety issues or missed training opportunities. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, staring at the framed photograph of Miguel's college graduation. He looked healthy and happy, surrounded by family members who had no idea what his sister had sacrificed to ensure he reached that moment. Sarah had never regretted her decision to leave pilot training, but she had also never stopped being a pilot at heart. She made another decision that would prove fateful. Opening her laptop, Sarah began drafting a detailed analysis of the Operation Desert Thunder plans. She framed her recommendations in terms of logistics efficiency and resource optimization, but the underlying tactical insights were unmistakably those of an experienced combat pilot. She worked late into the night, drawing on 12 years of suppressed knowledge and continuing education to create a comprehensive review of the exercise design. When she finished, Sarah had produced a 20-page document that would significantly improve the training value and safety of Operation Desert Thunder. But submitting it would also raise questions about how a logistics officer had developed such sophisticated understanding of air combat operations. As dawn broke over the Nevada desert, Sarah faced the same type of decision that had changed her life 12 years earlier. She could play it safe and submit only minor recommendations that wouldn't raise suspicions. Or she could risk her carefully maintained cover to help ensure that Operation Desert Thunder achieved its training objectives and kept pilots safe. Looking again at Miguel's photograph, Sarah remembered the courage it had taken to change course once before. Sometimes the right choice required accepting risk and uncertainty. She attached the analysis to an email addressed to Major Thompson and Colonel Harrison, took a deep breath, and pressed send. Within hours, her carefully hidden secret would begin to unravel, setting in motion events that would eventually place her in the cockpit of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. Major Thompson found the email waiting in his inbox when he arrived at the office that morning. The subject line read, "Logistics Analysis for Operation Desert Thunder," and he expected to find the usual recommendations about fuel schedules and maintenance coordination. What he discovered instead left him staring at his computer screen in amazement. Sarah's analysis was unlike anything he had ever seen from a logistics officer. She had identified tactical vulnerabilities in the exercise design that even the experienced fighter pilots had missed. Her recommendations for aircraft positioning, timing adjustments, and engagement parameters showed an understanding of air combat principles that typically took years of flying experience to develop. Thompson printed the entire document and read it twice before walking to Colonel Harrison's office. He knocked on the door and entered when the colonel called for him to come in. "Sir, you need to see this," Thompson said, placing the analysis on Harrison's desk. "Captain Martinez submitted this review of the Desert Thunder exercise plans." Colonel Harrison began reading, and Thompson watched as the colonel's expression shifted from casual interest to intense focus. Harrison had flown fighter aircraft for over 20 years before moving into command positions, and he recognized sophisticated tactical thinking when he saw it. "Where did she get this level of insight?" Harrison asked, looking up from the document. "Her personnel file shows no flight training, no tactical education, no combat experience. This analysis reads like it was written by a weapons school graduate." Thompson shook his head. "I've been wondering the same thing, sir. She's been making increasingly sharp observations about operational matters, but I assumed she was just naturally analytical. This goes far beyond that." Harrison continued reading, making notes in the margins. After 20 minutes, he set the document down and looked directly at Thompson. "Every single one of these recommendations is correct. If we implement these changes, Desert Thunder will be significantly more effective as a training exercise. The question is, how a logistics officer knows enough about air-to-air combat to write something like this." "Should I talk to her about it?" Thompson asked. "Not yet," Harrison replied thoughtfully. "Let me make some calls first. Something doesn't add up about Captain Martinez, and I want to understand what we're dealing with before we confront her directly." While Colonel Harrison began his investigation, Sarah continued her normal duties, though she felt increasingly anxious about the analysis she had submitted. She had tried to disguise her tactical knowledge behind logistics terminology, but she knew that experienced pilots would see through her camouflage. Every time Thompson looked at her during their daily coordination meetings, she wondered if he suspected something. Her anxiety increased when Harrison's secretary called and asked her to report to the colonel's office at 1400 hours. Sarah spent the morning trying to prepare explanations for how a logistics officer might have developed insights into fighter tactics. But every story she invented sounded implausible. At exactly 2 o'clock, Sarah knocked on Colonel Harrison's door and entered when summoned. She was surprised to find not only Harrison and Thompson, but also Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Williams, the base's chief of flight operations. Williams was known throughout the Air Force as one of the most experienced female fighter pilots of her generation, someone who had broken barriers and earned respect through exceptional skill and leadership. "Captain Martinez, please have a seat," Harrison said, his tone neutral but serious. "We wanted to discuss your analysis of Operation Desert Thunder." Sarah sat down, maintaining her composure despite the racing of her heart. "Yes, sir. I hope the logistics recommendations were helpful." Harrison smiled slightly. "They were more than helpful, Captain. In fact, they were so insightful that they raised some questions." He paused, studying her face. "Lieutenant Colonel Williams has reviewed your document, and she agrees that your recommendations will significantly improve the exercise. The question is how you developed such sophisticated understanding of air combat tactics." Sarah felt trapped, but tried to maintain her cover story. "I've always believed that understanding operational requirements helps me do my logistics job better, sir. I spend time studying aircraft capabilities and mission parameters so I can anticipate support needs." Williams leaned forward in her chair. "Captain, I've been flying fighters for 18 years, and I've worked with logistics officers throughout my career. What you've written goes far beyond understanding support requirements. You've identified tactical concepts that aren't taught outside of advanced pilot training programs." The room fell silent as the three senior officers waited for Sarah's response. She could feel the weight of 12 years of hidden truth pressing down on her, but she also knew that admitting her background now could end her career. The Air Force didn't look kindly on officers who concealed their qualifications or misrepresented their experience. "I'm not sure what you want me to say," Sarah replied carefully. "I submitted recommendations based on my analysis of the logistics data and my understanding of operational efficiency." Harrison opened a folder on his desk and pulled out several sheets of paper. "Captain, after reviewing your analysis yesterday, I made some calls to research your background. What I found was interesting." He looked directly at her. 12 years ago, a Lieutenant Sarah Martinez was enrolled in undergraduate pilot training at Columbus Air Force Base. That lieutenant was rated as one of the top students in her class and was selected for fighter training. Then suddenly she voluntarily transferred to logistics with no explanation beyond claiming she had developed interest in supply chain management. Sarah's heart sank. She had known this moment might come eventually, but she had hoped to avoid it longer. "Sir, I can explain." Williams interrupted her. "Before you say anything else, Captain, you should know that we've also discovered you maintain a current civilian pilot's license and have been regularly flying civilian aircraft. Flight instructors at 3 different airports have described you as one of the most naturally gifted pilots they've ever worked with." The evidence was overwhelming, and Sarah realized that continuing to deny her background would only make things worse. She took a deep breath and made the decision to tell the truth, regardless of the consequences. "You're correct, sir," she said quietly. "I was in pilot training 12 years ago. I transferred to logistics for personal reasons that had nothing to do with my flying ability or my commitment to the Air Force." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "What personal reasons could have been important enough to make you give up a fighter pilot career?" Sarah hesitated, then decided that if she was going to tell the truth, she should tell all of it. She explained about Miguel's cancer diagnosis, her family's financial struggles, and her decision to prioritize being available to support her brother during his treatment. She described how she had hidden her sacrifice from everyone, including Miguel himself, and how she had continued flying in secret to maintain her skills. When she finished her story, the office remained quiet for several moments. Finally, Williams spoke. "Captain, why didn't you return to flying after your brother recovered? You could have applied for a return to pilot training." "By the time Miguel was healthy, I had been out of flying for several years," Sarah explained. "I thought it was too late, and I had built a career in logistics. I convinced myself that I was satisfied with my choice." Harrison studied her personnel file again. "According to these records, you've been an exceptional logistics officer. Your efficiency ratings are outstanding, and you've successfully managed some complex operations. But your analysis of Desert Thunder suggests you never really stopped thinking like a pilot. Sarah nodded. Flying has always been part of who I am, sir. I tried to suppress it, but I couldn't completely let it go. I've continued studying aircraft systems, tactics, and combat procedures because I love aviation, not because I expected to use that knowledge professionally. Thompson, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. Captain, your recommendations for Desert Thunder could save training time and potentially prevent accidents. Your insights are exactly what we need for this exercise. The question now is what we do with this information. Williams looked at Harrison, then back at Sarah. Captain, would you be interested in returning to flying if such an opportunity existed? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had dreamed about returning to the cockpit countless times over the years, but she had convinced herself it was impossible. Ma'am, I would love nothing more than to fly again, but I understand that my situation is complicated. I concealed my background, and I haven't flown military aircraft in 12 years. Harrison closed the folder and leaned forward. Captain Martinez, the Air Force has invested heavily in training you as both a pilot and a logistics officer. Your unique combination of skills could be extremely valuable, especially in situations where we need someone who understands both operational and support requirements. What are you suggesting, sir? Sarah asked, hardly daring to hope. I'm suggesting that we evaluate whether you're still capable of flying military aircraft, Harrison replied. If you are, we might be able to find ways to utilize both your logistics expertise and your flying skills. Williams nodded in agreement. The Air Force is always looking for experienced pilots, especially ones with additional qualifications. Your logistics background could make you uniquely valuable for certain types of missions. Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. The possibility of returning to flying was everything she had dreamed about, but she also feared that she might have lost her edge during 12 years away from military aircraft. What would the evaluation process involve? She asked. Harrison smiled for the first time since the meeting began. We'd start with a comprehensive flight physical to ensure you're medically qualified. Assuming you pass that, we'd put you through a series of flight evaluations in progressively more complex aircraft. If you demonstrate that you've maintained your skills, we'd explore options for incorporating flying duties into your career path. Williams added, The process wouldn't be easy, Captain. Military aviation has evolved significantly since you were in training. You'd need to learn new systems, new procedures, and new tactics. But based on your analysis of Desert Thunder, I believe you have the foundation to succeed. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes but fought to maintain her composure. Sir, ma'am, I would be honored to have that opportunity. Flying has been my passion since I was a child, and leaving it behind was the hardest decision I've ever made. Harrison stood up, signaling that the meeting was concluding. Very well, Captain. I'll initiate the process to have you medically cleared for flight duty. In the meantime, I want you to implement your recommendations for Operation Desert Thunder. Consider it your first official assignment as both a logistics officer and a potential pilot. As Sarah left the colonel's office, she felt as though she was walking in a dream. After 12 years of hiding her true identity and suppressing her deepest ambitions, she was finally going to have a chance to return to the sky. But she also knew that the real test was yet to come. Passing the medical evaluation and demonstrating her flying skills would determine whether her dream of returning to military aviation would become reality. That evening, Sarah called Miguel for the first time in months. She had always kept their conversations brief and focused on his life, afraid that talking too long might lead her to reveal the sacrifice she had made for him. But now, with the possibility of returning to flying, she felt a need to hear his voice. Sarah, Miguel answered enthusiastically. What a surprise. How are things going in Nevada? They're going well. she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Miguel, I need to ask you something. Do you remember when you were sick in high school, and I took all that time off to be with you during treatment?" Miguel was quiet for a moment. "Of course I remember. Those were scary times, but having you there made all the difference. You were always so strong and positive, even when the doctors weren't sure what would happen." Sarah took a deep breath. "Did you ever wonder how I was able to take so much time away from my military duties?" "I guess I figured you had flexibility in your job," Miguel replied. "Why do you ask?" Sarah realized she wasn't ready to tell him the full truth yet, not until she knew whether her return to flying would be successful. "No particular reason. I was just thinking about that time and how much it meant to have family support during difficult periods." "Well, you've always been the best big sister anyone could ask for," Miguel said warmly. "I hope you know how grateful I am for everything you've done for our family." After ending the call, Sarah stood on the balcony of her quarters and looked out at the flight line. Several F-22 Raptors were visible in the distance, their sleek forms illuminated by runway lights. For the first time in 12 years, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to sit in the cockpit of such an aircraft. The next morning, Sarah reported to the base medical facility for her flight physical. The examination was thorough and took most of the day, but the flight surgeon found no medical issues that would disqualify her from pilot duty. Her vision was still perfect, her reflexes were sharp, and her cardiovascular fitness exceeded the minimum standards. "Congratulations, Captain," the flight surgeon told her. "You're medically qualified for all categories of military aircraft. I must say it's unusual to see someone your age with such excellent physical condition. Whatever you've been doing to stay in shape, keep it up." Sarah smiled. Thinking about the countless hours she had spent in civilian aircraft and flight simulators, maintaining not just her flying skills but also the physical conditioning that aviation demanded. With her medical clearance complete, the next phase would begin, demonstrating that she could still fly military aircraft with the skill and precision required for combat operations. Colonel Harrison had arranged for her to start with basic aircraft and work her way up to more complex systems, culminating in an evaluation that would determine her future in military aviation. As Sarah prepared for her return to the cockpit, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, unlike anything she had experienced since her original pilot training. After 12 years of living a secret double life, she was finally going to discover whether she could reclaim her identity as a military pilot and pursue the dreams she had set aside for family loyalty. 2 weeks after receiving her medical clearance, Sarah stood on the flight line at dawn, staring at the T-38 Talon that would serve as the first test of her flying abilities. The sleek white training aircraft looked exactly like the ones she had flown during her original pilot training 12 years earlier. But everything felt different now. Then, she had been a young lieutenant with unlimited confidence and no understanding of what sacrifice meant. Now, she was a 34-year-old captain who had spent over a decade wondering if she would ever get this chance again. Lieutenant Colonel Williams approached from the operations building, carrying her flight gear and wearing the calm expression of an experienced pilot. She had volunteered to conduct Sarah's evaluation flights personally, partly because she was curious to see how someone could maintain flying skills for 12 years without military aircraft access. "Good morning, Captain," Williams said. "Ready to see if you remember how to fly?" Sarah nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "Yes, ma'am. I've been looking forward to this." Williams studied Sarah's face for signs of nervousness or overconfidence, both of which could be dangerous in a pilot. What she saw was focused determination mixed with healthy respect for the challenge ahead. "Before we get started, I want you to understand what we're doing here. This isn't just about whether you can still fly. We need to know if you can fly at the level required for modern military operations." "I understand, ma'am." "Good. We'll start with basic maneuvers and gradually increase complexity. I'll be evaluating not just your stick and rudder skills, but your decision-making, your situational awareness, and your ability to handle unexpected situations. If at any point I determine that continuing the evaluation would be unsafe, we'll terminate the flight." Sarah had expected nothing less. Military aviation demanded perfection because the consequences of failure were often fatal. "Yes, ma'am. I'm prepared for that." The pre-flight inspection took longer than usual because Williams wanted to see how thoroughly Sarah checked the aircraft. She was impressed to observe that Sarah's inspection was methodical and complete, catching several minor discrepancies that a less experienced pilot might have missed. "Where did you learn to do such a thorough pre-flight?" Williams asked. "I learned the hard way that civilian aircraft often don't receive the same level of maintenance as military ones," Sarah replied. "I've gotten in the habit of checking everything twice." As they strapped into their seats, Williams felt increasingly optimistic about Sarah's preparation. Her briefing had been comprehensive, her knowledge of aircraft systems was current, and her approach to safety was exactly what Williams wanted to see in a military pilot. The T-38's engines spooled up with their familiar high-pitched whine, and Sarah felt a surge of emotion as the aircraft came alive around her. She had flown similar aircraft countless times in her dreams, but this was the first time in 12 years that she had been in control of a real military jet. "Nellis Tower, Viper 21, ready for takeoff," Sarah called, using the call sign Williams had assigned her for the flight. Her radio technique was professional and crisp, showing no signs of rust. "Viper 21, Nellis Tower, cleared for takeoff, runway 21 left. Winds 240 at 15. Sarah advanced the throttles smoothly, and the T-38 accelerated down the runway. As the aircraft reached takeoff speed, she pulled back gently on the stick and felt the familiar sensation of leaving the earth behind. For a moment, emotion threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to focus on flying the aircraft precisely. "Nice takeoff," Williams commented through the intercom. "Let's climb to 10,000 feet and start with some basic maneuvers." For the next hour, Williams put Sarah through a comprehensive evaluation of fundamental flying skills. She requested steep turns, stalls, unusual attitude recoveries, and precision approaches. With each maneuver, Sarah's confidence grew as muscle memory and years of secret practice combined to produce exactly the performance she had hoped for. "Your basic skills are excellent," Williams said as they prepared to return to base. "But I want to try one more thing. I'm going to simulate an emergency, and I want to see how you handle it." Without warning, Williams pulled one throttle to idle and announced, "You've just lost your right engine. What's your response?" Sarah immediately began the emergency procedures she had memorized years earlier. She maintained aircraft control, identified the failed engine, secured the fuel flow, and trimmed the aircraft for single-engine flight. Her actions were quick and precise, exactly what Williams wanted to see. "Outstanding," Williams said, restoring the throttle. "That was textbook emergency handling." As they landed back at Nellis, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. She had passed the first test, but she knew more challenging evaluations lay ahead. Colonel Harrison was waiting in the operations building when they returned. "How did she do?" he asked Williams. "Better than I expected," Williams replied honestly. "Her basic flying skills are sharp, her emergency procedures are solid, and her decision-making appears sound. I recommend we move to the next phase." The next phase involved flying the F-16 Fighting Falcon, a single-seat fighter that would test Sarah's ability to handle more complex systems and higher performance characteristics. Because the F-16 was a single-seat aircraft, Sarah would fly solo after extensive ground preparation and simulator training. For 3 days, Sarah immersed herself in F-16 systems training, relearning the aircraft she had last flown during her original pilot training. The modern F-16s at Nellis were equipped with advanced avionics and weapon systems that hadn't existed 12 years earlier, requiring her to master new technologies while refreshing her knowledge of basic fighter operations. Captain Mike "Hawk" Rodriguez, one of the F-16 squadron's most experienced pilots, served as Sarah's instructor for the ground training. Initially skeptical about training someone who had been away from fighters for over a decade, Rodriguez quickly became impressed with Sarah's preparation and attitude. "Most pilots coming back to flying after a break are overconfident," Rodriguez explained to Williams after the second day of training. "They think they remember more than they actually do. Captain Martinez is different. She's humble enough to admit what she doesn't know, but sharp enough to learn quickly. She's also asking the right questions about things that have changed since she was last in fighters." On a clear Thursday morning, Sarah climbed into an F-16 cockpit for the first time in 12 years. The aircraft smelled of jet fuel and electronics, familiar scents that brought back a flood of memories from her training days. As she went through the pre-flight checks, muscle memory guided her hands to switches and controls she hadn't touched in over a decade. The F-16's single engine provided much more thrust than the T-38, and Sarah felt pressed back into her seat as she accelerated down the runway. As the landing gear retracted and she climbed into the Nevada sky, Sarah experienced a joy she had almost forgotten existed. This was what she had been born to do, and no amount of time away could change that fundamental truth. Her first F-16 flight focused on basic aircraft handling and systems familiarization. Sarah reacquainted herself with the fighter's performance characteristics, testing its acceleration, climb rate, and maneuverability. By the end of the flight, she was operating the aircraft with confidence and precision. Over the next week, Sarah's F-16 training progressed rapidly through increasingly complex scenarios. She practiced air-to-air combat maneuvers, ground attack profiles, and advanced navigation techniques. Each flight built on the previous one, and Sarah demonstrated the ability to integrate multiple tasks while maintaining precise aircraft control. Rodriguez, who had been flying F-16s for 8 years, was amazed by Sarah's rapid progress. "I've never seen anyone regain proficiency this quickly," he told Colonel Harrison. "It's like she never left. Actually, in some ways, she's better than pilots who've been flying continuously. She's developed a patience and analytical mindset that younger pilots often lack." The evaluation reached its crescendo when Sarah successfully completed a mock combat mission against 2 experienced F-16 pilots. Using tactics she had studied during her years away from flying, combined with insights gained from her logistics perspective, she managed to defeat both opponents in simulated air-to-air combat. "That was impressive," one of her opponents admitted after the flight. "You flew like someone with years of combat experience, not someone just getting back into fighters." Colonel Harrison reviewed the results of all Sarah's flights and found her performance consistently excellent. But he had one more test in mind, something that would truly demonstrate whether she belonged in the highest levels of military aviation. "Captain Martinez," Harrison said, calling her into his office on a Friday afternoon. "Your F-16 evaluation has been outstanding. Lieutenant Colonel Williams and Captain Rodriguez both recommend you for full return to fighter pilot status." Sarah felt her heart racing but maintained her composure. "Thank you, sir. I've worked hard to meet the standards." Harrison smiled. "Actually, you've exceeded the standards significantly, which brings me to an unusual opportunity." He paused, studying her reaction. "How would you feel about flying the F-22 Raptor?" Sarah stared at him in disbelief. The F-22 was the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, flown only by the most elite pilots in the Air Force. "Sir, I would be honored beyond words, but I'm not sure I've earned that opportunity." "Let me be the judge of that," Harrison replied. "We have a situation developing that requires a pilot with your unique combination of skills." Operation Desert Thunder has been expanded to include a classified mission that requires someone who understands both logistics and advanced fighter tactics. Your analysis of the original exercise plans, combined with your demonstrated flying ability, makes you the ideal candidate. Williams, who had been quietly observing the conversation, added, "The mission involves coordinating with Special Operations Forces while flying the most sensitive aircraft in our inventory. We need someone we can trust completely, someone who has proven they can handle secrets and make sacrifices for the greater good." Sarah realized they weren't just offering her a chance to fly the F-22, they were offering her a role in a mission that would utilize everything she had learned during her 12 years away from military aviation. What would the mission involve? "I can't give you details until you've completed F-22 qualification," Harrison said. "But I can tell you that it will require all of your skills as both a pilot and a logistics expert. You'll be working directly with special operations units to support their missions in ways that conventional fighters cannot." The following Monday, Sarah began F-22 training with Major Lisa Venom Chen, one of the few pilots qualified to instruct in the world's most advanced fighter. The F-22's capabilities exceeded anything Sarah had ever imagined during her original pilot training. Its stealth characteristics, supersonic cruise ability, and advanced sensors represented a quantum leap beyond the aircraft she had previously flown. "The F-22 is not just a faster, stealthier fighter," Chen explained during their first ground session. "It's a completely different way of conducting air combat. You won't just be fighting other aircraft, you'll be managing the entire battle space, coordinating with ground forces and making decisions that affect the outcome of entire operations." Sarah absorbed every detail of the F-22's systems and capabilities. The aircraft's complexity was staggering, but her years of studying advanced aviation technology had prepared her for the learning challenge. More importantly, her logistics background helped her understand how the F-22's capabilities could be integrated with broader mission requirements. After 2 weeks of intensive ground training and simulator work, Sarah finally climbed into an actual F-22 cockpit. The aircraft's interior was unlike anything she had experienced, with advanced displays and controls that seemed more like a spaceship than a traditional fighter. As the engines spooled up, she felt the immense power of the F-22's thrust vectoring nozzles and knew she was about to experience aviation at its highest level. The takeoff was smoother and quieter than any fighter Sarah had ever flown. The F-22's stealth design reduced engine noise, and its advanced flight controls made aircraft handling effortless. As she climbed to altitude, Sarah marveled at the aircraft's performance and began to understand why F-22 pilots were considered the elite of the elite. "How does it feel?" Chen asked through the radio. "Like flying a machine from the future," Sarah replied honestly. Over the next month, Sarah's F-22 training progressed through increasingly sophisticated scenarios. She learned to use the aircraft's stealth capabilities to approach targets undetected, practiced coordinating with ground forces through advanced communication systems, and demonstrated the ability to manage multiple threats simultaneously. Major Chen, who had initially been skeptical about training someone with Sarah's unusual background, became one of her strongest advocates. "She thinks differently than most fighter pilots," Chen told Colonel Harrison. "Her logistics experience gives her a strategic perspective that enhances her tactical abilities. She doesn't just think about winning individual engagements. She considers how each action affects the broader mission." The culmination of Sarah's training came during a classified exercise that tested her ability to support special operations forces using the F-22's unique capabilities. The mission required her to coordinate precision strikes while remaining undetected by enemy forces, communicate with ground teams using encrypted systems, and adapt her tactics based on real-time intelligence updates. Sarah's performance during the exercise exceeded everyone's expectations. She successfully completed all mission objectives while demonstrating the kind of tactical innovation that separated good pilots from exceptional ones. When the exercise concluded, the Special Operations Commander specifically requested Sarah for future missions. "Captain Martinez," Colonel Harrison said, calling her to his office the day after the exercise. "I have good news and a question for you." Sarah waited expectantly. "The good news is that you've been selected for permanent assignment to F-22 operations. You'll be transferring from logistics to a flying position with the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron." Harrison paused. "The question is whether you're ready to tell your family the truth about what you've been doing for the past 12 years. Sarah smiled, thinking about Miguel and the phone call she would make that evening. After 12 years of hiding her sacrifice and her dreams, she was finally ready to share both her past decisions and her future opportunities with the people she loved most. "Yes, sir," she said. "I think it's time they knew that their sister and daughter has been preparing for this moment her entire adult life." That evening, Sarah called Miguel again, this time to tell him the complete truth about what she had given up for him and what she had just regained. As she explained her story, she looked out her window at the F-22 Raptors on the flight line, knowing that tomorrow she would climb into one of them not as a logistics officer pretending to be something else, but as exactly who she had always been, an elite pilot who had never stopped flying even when the world couldn't see her wings.